Hi, my name's Matt Davis. I'm the coordinator of the Leo Panitch School for Socialist Education. Really excited to have everyone here. We've got Salvatore and Clara from Italy and Spain, respectively. And so they're going to be talking to us about confronting the far right and lessons to be learned from their countries, from their regions. So we're really excited to have them here. They're in Toronto just for 2 weeks. Yeah, a couple weeks. So it's pretty cool that they were able to make room for us during their visit. I'd also like to give a shout out to the Global Labor Research Center at York. They're co-sponsoring tonight's event, which is really nice. It's always nice to do stuff with those folks. And then obviously we're the Leo Panitch School, and we're all members of the Socialist Project as well, the planning committee for tonight's event. So we're really happy to have you all here. First, we'd like to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Further, we acknowledge the right of First Nations people to real national self-determination. We also believe that it's important to recognize the common struggles experienced by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous working people, as well as the ways in which capitalism relies on prejudice, exploitation, and oppression to keep us divided. We also want to acknowledge, this is probably not necessary to acknowledge out loud, but we should, the ongoing genocide in Palestine by the Israeli state, and it is still to this day supported by the Canadian government. We can't lose sight of that. We join calls for a two-way arms embargo and encourage attendees to heed calls for action from Palestinian trade unions and civil society groups. So a bit about the school, people might already know. The school was founded in 2023, like I said before, by members of the Socialist Project. We're doing this in order to give a bit of a service to the left in the city, and now a little bit nationwide in Vancouver and Fredericton. We're doing courses there at the moment, which is pretty cool. So we're trying to give a little bit of a service to the left. We're trying to keep certain kinds of these, I think important socialist ideas alive. And we're also, at the same time, doing our best to honor the memory of Leo Panitch, who was a comrade of ours. So that's the school. We do frequent events and courses. So I think without further ado, I'll turn it over to Salvatore and Clara.
Well, thank you so much, man. He's incredible. He was there Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every time, very active. And thanks to everybody to come and for this invitation to Leo Panitch School, Social Register, of course, Carlo from Global Labor Research Center to put us in contact. We're so excited to be here. We feel at home. Because, in Italy, in Spain, we're trying to do it exactly the same, to create a new generation through political education, but also through struggles like that one of Mama Earth and a lot of trade unionism with young workers. I will try not to read, because I know it's boring, listening people reading a paper, but for you it's better maybe if I read, so I will try just to take a look sometimes. And one thing I wanted to say before starting is that it's very important, to having a moment like this, because in Italy we organize a lot of these events, and you're invited to come to explain to our comrades situation in Canada. Because, capitalism plays on a global scale, and we are always obliged and forced to think on a local dimension. And this is one of the reasons why we lose, because it's impossible to win when you just play in a little part of the ground and the other one have all the ground at disposal. And especially in this moment, we see that the international, that things that was so important to us, the Red International, First International, the second one not so much, but the third one was one good. This word was our word, and now we see this black international with Milei, Trump, Orban, Meloni, Netanyahu. You know, so it's very important for us to create our own moment of and our own international. And we already knew that. I remember in my personal experience, it was very important to me when I was 18. I was in the alter-mondialist movement, the anti-globalization movement in Naples, and we had a big meeting that ended up with a police repression, a police crackdown, very, very strong. And it was March of 2001. And 1 month later, there was in Quebec City another meeting, another protest against, I don't remember what global meeting. Yeah, that was it. And we were all looking, that moment, internet, a lot of us coming from working class, we didn't have any computer, but we were going together, we went together in our social center just to look to the images on the only one computer with the internet we had for like 50 people. And we saw the images from Quebec City and people fighting, and this sensation of being everywhere, you know, that guy in the video resisting to the police assault, it was like me the month before, and it would be me in Genoa in 2001, just few months later. So we really knows what international force can be. Because, you know, our relation with ideas, it's not only relation with theory, but relation with example, with concrete people, with, you know, this kind of action. So we're very excited for this. We owe something to people who mobilized in that moment in Canada. Okay, I'll stop with this moment of nostalgia, and I want to say just one other thing, because this moment is important, because you know, Canada and Italy, I can speak only for Italy, Clara will speak about Spain, but we have something in common. Obviously, we are a very different country. We are a very big country with, you know, a territory which is incredible, but we have something in common. We have the presence of the United States in our internal political life. We have a deep integration of our politics and economy and military sector with the United States, and the United States really pressure Italian political life. So I think if we put ourselves with a mentality to win, to change something, to have I don't want to say a revolution, but maybe at least a disengagement from US imperialism, well, the first thing to do, of course, is to stay in touch, to help us each other, because if tomorrow Italy can have a real political change, first thing to do, the United States will do, of course, it's to forbid this, and I hope we will have some solidarity in Canada, and of course we'll do the same if Canada can stop this presence of the United States. So I'll tell you, I thought to organize my presentation. I decided to follow the 3 questions you included in the event's promotional text, and that is the 3 questions. How did the rise of contemporary far-right came about in Southern Europe? How are left-wing and anti-fascist movements responding to this? What lesson can the socialists in Canada take from the experiences of Italy and Spain? So I would like to start with the first part. How did the rise of contemporary far-right came about in Italy? This will be the longest part, so be patient, and be patient, of course, with my English. That I know is a mess, but it's important because a correct analysis can give us some answer to the part of our strategy, of course. And in Italy, we mistake a lot of analysis about this. I mean, the left in general. Here, we must immediately debunk some myths that actually are circulating about Meloni's government, especially abroad. I will indicate some of these myths. I don't know if you can, if everybody can see, but very quickly, Meloni's movement is a new anti-establishment force that grew out of the protest movement. 2, Meloni receives a lot of votes and enjoys broad support. 3, Meloni represents the interested, albeit in a distorted way, of the working classes. 4, Meloni government is a fascist government. Well, this one maybe it's quite reality, but I want to point out that these are myths. Of course, I don't have the time to prove scientifically that each of these myths is false or at least a little bit exaggerated, but I need, because I need to keep this brief. I'll try to summarize. I don't know how you are familiar with Italian political history, but you have to think that Meloni comes from a political force made up of the successor of the fascist party. Immediately after the World War II, despite him having only around 5% of vote, this little neo-fascist party, or post-fascist party, this force played a role in Italian political life. You can guess why. Because to prevent Communist Party from coming to power in Italy, in that moment, Communist Party was very strong. We had trade union mobilized, we had even people in army because there were partisans, they fought the resistance. US and the CIA decided to use these people, these post-fascists, like agents. They needed a right-wing extremism to counter the left-wing extremism, so that the Christian Democratic, which is the principal party in Italy, that became in that moment the principal party in Italy, could stabilize and appear to all Italians as the lesser evil, you know? Like the typical speech was like, we don't want any dictatorship, neither communist or fascist one. The former fascists decided to accept and to play this role, and they shifted from an anti-Atlantic position to a pro-Atlantic position. They were against US, against NATO, and they decided to be pro-US, pro-NATO. And this strategy was effective, and in fact, Christian Democrats, as you know, governed Italy for 40 consecutive years. So to avoid a communist dictatorship and to avoid after a fascist dictatorship, we had a Christian Democrat dictatorship for 40 years. When the Berlin Wall fell and the Italian political system was restructured, with communists becoming social liberals, I know it's strange, but yeah, social liberals like Blair and Clinton, that was in that moment Blair and Clinton were very popular between the old communists. The former fascists also changed their name and became conservatives. At that point, 2 major blocs were formed, which essentially they exist still today, the right and center left. And these 2 blocks share some essential points. I will show you very quickly some essential points. First of all, you can imagine, to govern in Italy, you have to pay loyalty to NATO, and you have to have a special relationship with the United States. You have to support Israel. You have to have some distance with China. You have to be very attached to European Union. No one of these forces, despite kind of rhetoric, they don't want to go out from European Union, of course. They accept everything is decided in European Union. And of course, everyone of center-left, both center-left and right, are for a market economy, for privatization, and the precariousness of labor. The strategy after the fall of Berlin Wall was to use low-wage policies and and positioning Italian industry, that was very important in that moment, in a low value added sector. Okay, this is a kind of Marxist stuff. Carlo can explain better than me. He's got a lot of paper on this, but it's very important because it's in this decision made with the agreement of European Union and US that the industrial system in Italy was started to decline, working class started to be less strong, and then right can grow up. And of course they used a migrant workforce with neither rights because it was easy on a low value added sector, it's possible to do that. And we faced an increasing of authoritarianism against workers. I mean, laws against trade union were made both by center left and right, so there is a big agreement on this. And in society in general, too, we saw a lot of authoritarianism. So, you can imagine, here we have an agreement, but there are also a lot of significant differences in how the center left and the right implement this kind of policies. For example, this is interesting because all the major economic reforms that destroyed the Italian welfare state were carried out by center-left government. Why? Because they could count on the silence of the biggest union in Italy that were tied to them. Because, you know, Communist Party had a trade union, CGL, which was connected to them. When they changed and they became Democratic Party still had the relation with the CGL. So when Democratic Party was at the power, the promise was like, we do some neoliberal reform, but you will have some money back. And so trade union has accepted this. When the right was at the power, of course they also made some reforms, but these reforms were mostly superstructural. It was more about order, law, security, police security, and not about economics. So thanks to the center-right, to center-left, we have this kind of neoliberal reform of our country. And this is because, to put it in Gramscian terms, and today I want to remember it's the anniversary of Gramsci's death, which is, for us, it's still a big source of inspiration. He was assassinated by fascism in fascist prison. Well, to put in Gramsci terms, the two social blocks, these center-left and right, were partially different. The center-left bloc consisted of a segment of the working class that voted Communist Party and still went voting during a while for Democratic Party, and a segment of big capital. I know it's a little bit strange that you have two different pieces of society in the same social bloc, but that was the hegemony of a big capital that said we have to modernize Italy because the system was blocked by Christian Democrats during 40 years. So don't worry, you working class, come with us, we will modernize Italy and then you will have something back. Of course, this never happened. This politics of two times never happened. And so big capital in Italy was represented by center-left, and that was the part mostly connected with European Union and big enterprises. The right-wing bloc was led by Berlusconi and was instead tied to the small and middle bourgeoisie, to the self-employed, to the merchants, to small factories. All these classes in Italy, due for historical reason, the presence of Christian Democrats that, to avoid the development of Communist Party and the risk of revolution in Italy, they give a lot of money, a lot of power to the small bourgeoisie. So that's the reason why Italian capitalism, it's so the dimension of companies, it's very small, and they have a big role in the political life of our country. So these classes, we know as Marxists, they are condemned by history. So this is the point of fragility of this construction, but they are more homogeneous. You know, it's very difficult to put together big capital and working class. It's very easy to put together all the ones that are in the middle. So this, the promise that Berlusconi and then Meloni make to these people is that you can not pay taxes, you can use illegal form to survive in a global competition, and we can slow down the process of capitalist modernization in Italy. That said, both blocs must accept the points outlined above in order to govern. So, for this reason, I believe it's essential, since we are in Leo Panitch School, to take again what Leo Panitch said about fascism, and this kind of skepticism toward the indiscriminate use of the term fascist. Meloni could be a fascist in the sense that Leo meant when quoting Umberto Eco and referring to Mussolini. Leo talked about the dumbing down of political discourse, I'm quoting, as a characteristic of fascism in the Italian sense. In that sense, yes, she's a fascist in the sense that she represents a certain social bloc that moves from historical fascism to Berlusconi via the Christian Democrats. But she lacks almost all the typical characteristics of historical fascism. Here you can see some of these characteristics. I don't want to be too long, so I will limit myself to just name them. If we look at historical fascism, we can see that its features were big capital response. You know, fascism is born because he had to respond to a big growth of socialism and communism and the risk of revolution in Italy during the two red years in 1920 and 1921. And of course, squad violence. You can see this guy around Mussolini. They were all people from the squad that killed socialists and communists in Italy during 2 or 3 years before Mussolini went to the power. Of course, we don't have nothing of it in Italy now with Meloni. And of course, you know, fascism wants to crush political opposition, press freedom, and we see that Meloni makes some pressure on the opposition, on institutions. They try to restructure a little bit this liberal system, but of course she doesn't want a dictatorship now in Italy. And still, she doesn't want to organize masses in a different way. Fascists wanted to create a different, of course, fascism was the instrument, the tool of big capital, but it wanted to organize masses in a different political form that was neither liberal democracy, neither socialism. It was what Mussolini called corporatism. That is, Mussolini said, the essence of the fascism. We don't see nothing of this now in Italy. And in foreign policy, Mussolini wanted an autonomous imperialist projection. Of course, Meloni is tied to NATO. And economically, there was a kind of state intervention with Mussolini and the fascists to modernize the country. There was a search for sovereignty, what we don't have now with Meloni. So, almost all these elements of this form of fascism are missing. Meloni is not a response to a crisis or to revolutionary pressure. There is no significant grassroots activity, and this is a paradox, but at the very moment of their greatest electoral success, the far-right activist base is quite small. So what we see in Italy is that, along with what Leo Panitch said, we should speak, rather than of fascism, of a kind of neoliberal authoritarianism that makes some use of populistic rhetoric. Meloni did not win because she was able to interpret the discontent of the working classes, or because she gained new votes from outside the historical right-wing bloc. Rather, it was because the center-left had lost all of this credibility, and after the failed experience of the Five Star Movement, this populist party that was born 15 years ago, many people who wanted a kind of renewal of political life in our country withdrew into the private sphere with a lot of delusion. Meloni won with relatively few votes and with a lot of abstention. And their power so far has rested more on her indispensability to the United States, which controls Italian political life, and the opposition's weakness than on internal consensus. So, if we consider, for instance, the alliance Meloni has at international level in European Union, she's not with the group Patriots of Europe where Le Pen or Orban are, but she is with a conservative and reformist European, which is more like People's Party, the Popular Party in Europe. So she's a kind of a more, I would say, a more conservative side of the classic center-right in Europe. So, in short, as Leo Panitch reminded us, constantly crying fascism can lead to ineffective political strategies and can divert attention from the specific forms of capitalist power. And this is exactly what center-left in Italy has done, unfortunately aided by parts of the left, which have destroyed themselves with this strategy. And then I come to the second point. And don't worry, because it will be very, very short, because as you see, how the left-wing and anti-fascist movement responded to the crisis very badly. I mean, when I was young, like during the 90s, former communists who had become social liberals decided to play the anti-fascist front, this anti-fascist front card, against Berlusconi, because Berlusconi was the new Duce, because he had a decisive style, he was populist, he involved former fascists in his project of government, and so the center-left declared, there is danger, we must unite it, we must put everything together, we must conquer the center of the political spectrum. And so you can imagine this produced only one thing, that all the political discourse, all the political speech went to the right, because the left and everything that remains of the old communists organized in a little party that had like 5 or 6% of votes, all these communists, they were forced to accept an agreement and go to government with the center-left without having not a single success in this government. So this destroyed the left, and within 15 years, no more communist or socialist. You know, we say in Italy communists say almost the same. I mean, someone that is an anti-capitalist, no one of them was in our parliament. So, luckily, at the grassroots level, I come from social movements in Italy, we were a lot, things were a bit different, and since 2008, we have seen several cycles of mobilization in Italy. These cycles were significant in terms of numbers, but unlike France or Spain, these cycles did not produce a new left-wing political organization. This is partly because left had no credibility after this alliance, and partly because there was a lot of tendency in social movement refusing to organize. You know, a lot of kind of autonomous libertarian speech, and so at the end of the day, it was five-star movements which can take some of the protests and go to the government, but five-star movements declare declares itself neither right nor left, and lacks a clear anti-fascist identity. Indeed, the first and the only government the Five-Star Movements made was with another far-right party, which is the North League in Italy, which is a very racist party. So it was a little government. It doesn't last so much, but they made a lot of bad things against migrants in Italy. So I would like to go to lesson that we have to learn, because all these social movements and small collectives, finally, they try to organize themselves, and during this confrontation with fascism, a new generation of activists was born, and they created a new radical left-wing organization that is Potere al Popolo, Power to the People, that was born in 2018. And what Potere al Popolo seeks to do is not to downplay, of course, the gravity of the Meloni government. On the contrary, we want that people understand that this government is dangerous because it's a part of a much stronger trend. It's like Meloni is the visible fascism, but there is a lot of invisible fascism that will go on after Meloni experience, which is maybe it's ending now, Meloni government, but there is an invisible fascism in Italy that will go on. So this trend has nothing to do with a leader or a party, but with the needs of capitalistic reason and Italian capital that is tied with its social bloc, with an ideological structure. So, what lessons, to go to the third part, Canadian socialists left learn from the Italian experience? I would say that given the state of Italian left, we don't have many lessons to offer, of course. But let's see something we can learn. I'll try to find something interesting. Or rather, we can say what not to do if you don't want to commit political suicide. For example, you don't have to sacrifice your autonomy to the liberals. You don't have to destroy the organized form of labor movement. All these things passed in Italy. You don't have to abandon the use of certain theories, such as of Marxist theory. When I was at university, it was impossible at the beginning of this century to talk about Marx at university. The professors were forbidden. It seems like to see very old stuff. And so we are like a country of the Eastern Europe. You cannot speak. Now things are changing, but there was a kind of repression. So you don't have to do all of this that the Italian left did. And it seems to me quite bad to conclude with a list of don'ts. So I'd like to suggest a few things that we are experimenting in Italy. It seems that are quite working, because if you saw what happened this fall with mobilization for Palestine and for global flotilla, and if you see the victory against Meloni last month, because Meloni wanted to change constitution in a referendum, we won the referendum with a big pressure from grassroots movements, well, we can say something, it's working. And I try to summarize. Of course, in Italy, I'm not talking about the US. Maybe their situation is different, but in Italy, if you want to fight the far right, it makes no sense to form again an anti-fascist front with the liberals. Of course, we must collaborate on certain battles to defend democratic rights, because sectarian isolation doesn't work. But the point, in my view, is that we need to change our paradigm. We must look to those excluded from the political game, to the abstainers, to the vast majority of society that simply does not understand what fascism, anti-fascism means today. In fact, and this is a theoretical point I want to suggest, it's not like the 30s and even the 70s, and even when I was young in the 90s, a ready-made social terrain, a social ground that is waiting to be oriented in a reformist or revolutionary direction. Our society, our world, our class has been fragmented and does not respond to any command. In other words, there is no demand waiting for our answer. It is the social terrain itself that must be rebuilt. We must build our own audience. We must, like in business terms, we could say we have to create a new demand. If we do not do this, we always be chasing after the liberals of the dictator of the moment. Today is Meloni, yesterday was Berlusconi, and so on. Then I will be very quick on the other point, but first things we started to do is a social inquiry. Of course, classes have changed a lot. We have to understand, and we have to have, not only with that theoretical work, studying the books, but speaking with people, so going outside factories, workplace, and understand their needs. And then we must not be obsessed with the immediate. We need to take some time in order to point out what sectors of the class we have to approach, we have to work with. Because not all the public in this moment can be, we can speak with them. We cannot make all these people get involved all in once. And then practical work. I don't say a lot about this. Mother Earth mobilization, a lot of mobilization that we can do. We created a network of mutual aid and support, because in Italy, crisis affected a lot working people. And so, the poor working class need immediate response. So in this case, immediate is good. We have to face capitalist crisis with giving some tools to our people. So we created social center, house of the people, where you can find a lot of resources. And we must develop on this basis our media. But the point here is that the force, in my opinion, of the far right is that they can connect what you see at global level with your everyday life experience. So the media, if it works, it's just not the site we put our analysis on. The media, it's something that can make this connection between what I'm living, actually, everyday life, and what is an horizon of meaning on what you do with your life. And finally, we must try to be in every single institution, no matter how little this institution is. We are experimenting like a presence in municipality council, which is a group of organization of 100, it's a little representation of 100,000 people in our city. No, in little municipality, we have people elected, and you enter in everyday people life, and you can understand what the people really needs and be less abstracted. So, on this note, I'd like to conclude because I already spoke too much. But I want to say that 2 days, on April 25, Italy was celebrating Liberation Day, commemorating the 25th of April of 1945, when the partisans rose up and defeated Nazi fascism. In every city across Italy, there were massive demonstrations. We know because Potere al Popolo, it's a national organization, so we were in like 50 demonstrations all around Italy, and these demonstrations were larger than expected. In short, it seems that this grassroots work that we are doing, and not only us, I want to say, this is a changing of mentality in all Italian left, is ultimately transforming the world in a qualitative way for the first time. I can show you a video after if you want to take some image of this force and this new generation taking the street. But I want to say this does not automatically mean that communists or socialists will manage to grow in the near future. Of course, the liberal center-left could co-opt this desire for liberation and betray it, as it always has. Or these young people may simply not engage in politics because they cannot find any political structures that really fits to them, to their desire. But certainly, a glimmer of hope has emerged in Italy. And that is also what I wanted to bring you and to share with you, this hope of a new generation in Italy maybe doing better than the last generation that was unable to fight fascism and far right in our country. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, you all, for coming, and also thank you, Matt, for organizing this meeting. Also, Carlo Fanelli, because he made this possible, making possible with Matt. And I will not be as professional as Salvatore. I have not that wonderful thing, but I will try to explain some ideas about Spain, because yes, I'm from a country which is Spain, where the far right has not governed at the national level. Okay, we have for the past 6 years we have a coalitional. I don't know if it's the name in English. The coalition government. Yes. Okay. It is mainly made by up of the Socialist Party. Is his name. The main center-left party, we would say, led by Pedro Sánchez, and with the other side is Sumar. Sumar comes from what used to be Podemos project, a project I was part from the very beginning. Okay, it was I was part of the founding team. I was on the leadership of this party the first 5 years, and I was responsible for feminist and LGBTQ policy at national level. Okay, as probably you know, Podemos has been a very important political phenomenon for the left, because it grew very, very fast. In 2016, just 2 years after it was created, it reached around 21% of the vote, only in 2 years. Okay, we didn't exist, and in 2 years we were nearly to be the second party of the country. But also happened that very soon it went through a very difficult and painful split. In 2019, the project divided into 2 national parties. Now we have 2 parts of this project. One is Sumar, is this one that is now in the government, gets around 7% of the vote, and the other one still uses the name of Podemos, but now is a party that gets between the 2 and the 4% of support, and has disappeared in many places. It's not longer represented. Okay. This internal split created a very strong conflict, internal conflict that is not internal now, is explicit conflict, no? Between forces that are in a competition, in an electoral competition. And so today, instead of one shared space, there are many different political platforms, mainly in the local level, no? And that's because I went away, because I didn't want to be in this kind of situation where we were fighting one against the others. Okay, but I start like this because what I think that is important to understand is to understand the far right in Spain today. We need to understand that Spain is a country where a lot has happened. A lot has happened. That has changed a lot in the last 15 years. So what happened in Spain and what context, in what context does Vox emerge? Because this is the name of our far-right Vox. There are two major events that really shock the country. The first one was has to do with this thing I talk about, the rise of Podemos and the condition that made it possible. And the second one was a territorial conflict. We had a process of independence in a part of our territory, and Catalonia wanted to go away from Spain. And we had this declaration of independence in 2017. Was considered an illegal declaration of independence, and the Spanish state responded with a very, very strong response, legal response. The people were into jail. Okay, the leader went into jail, and others must go away from the country and live in another countries still now. Well, now is starting to get normalized, the situation. But was like this for many years. Okay, the far right reacts to both of these processes. Very important. So let's start with the first one. This story begins in 2011, when we are in this period after the crisis, the economic crisis after 2008. Okay, after years of austerity and spending cuts that was carried out by both the center left and the right, people took the streets. One day, people took the streets in May 2011. Okay, that's why we call this movement 15M. Okay, because it was this 15th of May of 2011. People occupied the main squares in Spanish city, but many cities in Madrid was incredible. Thousands and thousands of people, and stayed there for more than a month. Sometimes were even a month and a half. People was living in the squares, okay, with a camping. And they organized daily open assemblies with thousands of people taking part. And later, after this month or month and a half, they went to the neighborhoods and continued for years, like 2 years, 3 years. You could go to your assembly, which was called the 15M assembly of your neighborhood, and we continue to organize. Okay, so it was a very huge movement. And this movement was expressing social discontent about cuts of public services, unemployment, of course, job insecurity, and cost of the living and of housing, because we couldn't pay the house. And both Podemos and Vox, which this is only a curiosity, but they were presented in 2013 nearly in the same day. Vox was presented one day, and the next day was presented Podemos. Incredible. Okay, so they was born in the same time, in the same moment, and they emerged in this moment of strong loss of legitimacy of traditional political parties. There was like a kind of anti-political climate in Spain, where many people say that all politicians are the same, they are part of an elite, and they do not resolve the problem of the people. But this thing, no, they are all the same thing. They are all, we reject all them, no. So there was kind of destituent moment in Spain, and a moment where the system itself was being questioned. This was a very interesting thing. And Podemos is born with that reading of reality. And that's why it has been analyzed as a form of left-wing populism. Sometimes is this the way of understanding Podemos. Amongst other things, it relies on a strong and charismatic leader. Pablo Iglesias was the leader of Podemos, and Pablo Iglesias uses the media. He went to the TV to speak like a regular figure of television, and once he became very well known, he announced the creation of a new party, and he calls on people to create assemblies all over the country as a continuation, obviously, of the 15 movement in the, let's say, the institutional or political way, okay? But what was going on with the far right? As I said, it is also born in the moment of a strong social discontent and a crisis of the two-party system. This far right box has this idea about that there is this political elite, there is a kind of aristocracy of parties that have been in power too long and that have forgotten about the problems of the people. But at the same time, that anti-political feeling, which could have taken, I think, a very reactionary direction, was captured by Podemos. Okay, so in this like populist moment, is Podemos the one that understands what is the people thinking and how to get to talk to the people. At the beginning, our idea in Podemos was that we needed one foot inside that common sense and one foot outside of the common sense. One foot inside to connect with people, one foot outside to try to transform that common sense that was so anti-political, no? Because no, the political is not the same. No? We are not the same. Okay, that's mean trying to speak to everyone. Podemos wanted to speak to everyone, no matter where they come from, no matter if they had voted the right. And in that sense, Podemos rejected building his identity only through traditional left-wing symbols and left traditional discourses. Because we believe those did not connect with the majority and with a large part of working class. This working class was feeling betrayed, both for the right and by the liberal left. And I think that balance, being able to speak to the majority while having a radical transformative project, defines the first phases of Podemos, and was what we did very well, I think. We did it well, we did it good. For several years, the existence of a party like Podemos, which identified the center-left as part of the problem, actually contained the expansion of Vox on the far right. Just to have an idea, in 2016, 2 years after created Podemos was in the 21%, and Vox, that as I said was created in the meantime, in the same time, has had 0.2%. So they didn't exist. We are we were huge and they didn't exist. Why? Now we can ask, why does Podemos lose that function, and why? And I think that there are many reasons, different reasons. One of these is the internal split was very destructive. Okay. The other thing was entering in government in 2020. That was also a difficult thing for Podemos. And also a thing that I would like to speak about in the last part of this talk, that is the shift toward a more ideological and identity-based discourse that made Podemos, okay? But we have to understand first what defines the Spanish far right, because I think it's very important. Sometimes I think that I'm going to say something that also Salvatore said. Sometimes we talk about the far right in Europe like fascism, like new fascism. And I think it's not exactly, Vox is not exactly a fascist party, not in the classical sense. It comes from a split inside the Partido Popular, which is a popular party. This party is the main conservative party, the big right party. Okay, we have two main parties in Spain. This is the one of the right, and Vox comes from this huge party, very normal party, conservative party. Okay, it was founded by members from his more radical wing. And his discourses are actually quite traditional, very, very close to this classical national right. And it's true that let's say, it's true that it has links to sectors that connect to the Franquismo, okay, Franco, our dictatorship of Francisco Franco, because it's true that we have in Spain, which is a part of our problem, in Spain, this Franquismo was integrated into the democratic system and survived inside it, okay? We didn't split very, very well. We didn't cut this. It survived and remained closely connected to part of the state and to economic elites and become part of the system, okay? And I think that Vox must be understood as a political arm of this authoritarian form of neoliberalism, as Salvatore says, because this kind of right was very integrated in the neoliberalist system, okay? And in this sense, is actually more old than new. Vox. It's not very new things. It's also very conservative, it's very traditionalist. For example, in social issues, also Meloni, of course, but not, for example, the French far right, not like that. Because other far right parties in Europe, and France is a good example, have tried to expand their electorate by presenting themselves as more modern in some things. For example, by accepting abortion rights, by accepting LGBTQ freedoms. It's not the case of Vox. Vox didn't take that direction. And his political project includes like changing the constitution to restrict political pluralism. It's not in the mean that they want to go to a dictatorship, but they want to reduce some liberty, some political pluralism, and also they want to reduce our regional autonomy. They want more power to the state, to the central state, and they want to finish with this autonomy that we have in some parts of Spain, because Spain is a very plural country with different language, with different identities. Okay, they are obsessed that this plurality is a danger for the unite of Spain. Okay, and yes, and the thing is that in the economic sense, they are not defending protectionist economic policies. His economic program is based on lower taxes and cuts to public spending. So they are really, in this way, in this economic sense, they are really neoliberalism. They don't seem very different with this typical and classical right, this Partido Popular. They have no difference in this sense. They, for example, they don't say that the enemy is Brussels or Europe, and in this sense, in class terms, Vox is a party of elites economics, and because of that, it tries to, let's say, to reach support, popular support, and working class support through issues that are not economic. For example, anti-immigration. For example, anti-feminism. Okay, because they cannot say we want to change the economy. They cannot say that because they don't believe that. They want a neoliberalist policy. So they try to get some support in those issues, okay? Anti-immigration, anti-feminist, and more important, an opposition to this regional nationalism from Basque Country, from Catalonia, that they say that is going to destroy the country, it's going to destroy the unite of Spain. But for Vox, this is very important, the enemy is not external, it's an internal enemy, which is inside the country, okay? And in this way, the growth of Vox has to be also with this this huge movement, independent movement in Catalonia, because the huge growth of the big growth of Vox was in 2018. 1 year later than in Catalonia is the declaration of independence of Catalonia. Okay. It was wonderful for Vox. That was the key moment of expansion. And when that conflict becomes more normalized, it grows, stops or decreases. Of course, there are also other limits of Vox, because in the last three years, this far right has entered regional governments. This is not good for them, obviously. Okay, this is bad because they have lost their outsider imagine. No. However, today there is a real possibility that Vox could enter to the national government in the future. The future is the next year. So we are seeing what's going to happen. It's possible, but it's not necessary. But right now, I think this is important. It's not a force that is clearly growing, like has found his limits a little bit. He found limits. So in Spain, we have not seen a situation where the far right appears first and the left reacts to the far right, because sometimes we think it's like this. In Spain has been the opposite. The far right is a reaction to a political movement, to a political moment where real transformation seems possible. That was going on in Spain. And it means that Vox is not mainly about creating a completely new order. As I said, in class terms, it is tied to the interest of economic elites, and in many ways it is part of the system that existed before Podemos, and wants to go back to that system that existed before Podemos. Politically, it's part of how the Spanish right has adapted to the changes that came after 2008. And Salvatore also said that, no, for me, it's a form of authoritarian and reactionary neoliberalism. And I think that we should not understand, we should not underestimate what that can mean. It's very bad, obviously. But understanding in this way also helps us see its limits and its weakness. So I wanted to talk about how to not fail in front of this weakness, because what can we do better? I would like to talk about going back to this thing I said before, this something I mentioned it earlier, this increasing ideological tone, in part on left discourse, and the abandonment of kind of politics capable to speak to the majority. That was happening the last year in Spain, and I think that that was a very big mistake. Okay, because we must talk about feminists, because this is where Podemos focuses a lot of his efforts, especially when it took responsibility for equality policies in government. But the approach was often very ideological and very identity-based. In what sense? In the sense that feminism was only for women, and feminism was talking only about women's problem, okay? In this sense, I think that has generated a strong social backlash, and in this sense, like Podemos lose a good opportunity to speak to a very large, the people in a very large sense, in the sense that speaking to the majority. Today, many people who once identified as feminists no longer do. I don't know how it's in Canada, but the boys, the young boys, are very, very angry, and feminism, which was a very powerful and broad social movement in 2018, has lost part of that support. What we see now is a very ideological form of feminism, sometimes with this idea of only for women, sometimes with this idea only for real women, for example, not for trans women. All this searching the subject, no, the real subject of the feminism. But it's also growing a counter discourse, and this is very, very important, because Vox has been precisely because one of the main strategies of Vox has been precisely to mobilize that backlash, let's say. Part of the reason that has worked is that certain forms of feminist discourse in Spain have given the far right this, let's say, this oxygen that needed. And there is an important debate in Spain. What kind of feminism do we need to confront the far right? And it's a very interesting debate in Spain. We are all the feminists talking about this, writing about this, confronting ideas about this. And some of us have argued that feminism must speak to everyone again, once again. Of course, to women, especially working class women who may feel far from academic or activist discourse, but also to men, and especially to young men who are now a key target for the right. What I call an overly ideological and identity-based feminist is a discourse that almost celebrates, like as a sign of success, this level of male discomfort that exists today. No, it presents that frustration as something that feminists does not need to deal with. And many feminists think that this is a mistake, because if it's not addressed by feminists, it will be addressed and is already being addressed by the far right. So feminists cannot avoid this question. It has to be tactical and also strategic. It has to be committed to transforming society in a way that also promises more freedom to men. And I think this leads us to a necessary class analysis. If feminists accept the idea that male frustration is caused by women gaining rights, like when women gain rights, then the men have to lose their rights, then it's accepting the framework of the far right, because it is Vox that wants people to believe that if women gain rights, then men will lose them. That is not the real explanation, I think. We think the real causes are different. Widespread economic insecurity, job precarity, unemployment, especially in the male-dominated sector after the economic crisis of 2008, the fear of social decline, the pressure of men to be providers, all these things, all of this is also behind the frustration we see today. And the far right is the first to channel that anger towards others, towards women, towards migrants, towards LGBT people. So the main task for feminists today is to challenge that narrative and to point to other causes, to identify a common enemy, and to build a project where men and women fight together against this common enemy. So going to the last point, this task points to a future where the left is not powerless. We have something to do. We can't do things in the face of the far right. If I have insisted in this thing that Vox has limits and structural difficulties in becoming a majority force and talking to the working class people, is because understanding the weakness of your opponent also helps you to understand your own strengths. No? If those sources of oxygen disappear, then Vox has more difficult in becoming a mass populist right or a fascist force, capable of reaching the working classes. But that also means something, that is, if there is one place where we cannot fail, is speaking to that majority, which is our majority. And I finish here.
Thank you so much, Salvatore and Clara. That was really great. So we're going to have a bit of a Q&A.
about no kings, we had a big demonstration in Italy, like there was 100,000 people in Rome, which was not the biggest demonstration we had in the last month, because you see that in fall for the flotilla it was like 300,000, and there was tons of people we never saw before a Palestinian movement. It's like Palestine touched something in Italian society. Of course, there is a long history of struggle in Italy in solidarity with Palestine. And in Italy, you have to think that the president of government during the 80s, during a serious terrorist attack done by the OLP in that moment, the president of that moment, that was quite a socialist, reformist, strictly connected with Christian Democrats, he said in the parliament that he was not agree with the use of violence by the Palestinians. But since the Charter of the United States recognized that any oppressed people can use any tool in order to revolt against an oppression, he's not agreed, but they are right. So this is, of course, there was an Italian projection of Italian capital of Middle East, so there was a lot of interest. But Italy has a strong connection. Why I say of this? Because this touched also a political part which is very important in Italy, which is the Catholics. You know that Catholics, I hope you in Canada, you don't have this presence of the religion in your life. I don't know, but for us, the Pope is already present at the news. So every night you see what the Pope says about everything, you know. So, but sometimes it plays. I mean, in Italy, church is something that can cover everything. From the left, we have some priests in power to the people, just to understand. And then you have, of course, fascist priests. So church in Italy is an institution. It's not by chance that Gramsci studied a lot this institution, because it's very important in Italy. So just to say, Palestine makes that something move in very, in a lot of part of our society, the traditional leftist part, but also the Catholic part. And all of these converged in voting against Meloni. Because Meloni is really associated in Italy with Trump. And so the success of these protests in United States, no kings, became, since we are very connected with the United States, became a success for Italian mobilization. Then I have some doubt. I mean, it was just a date, it was just a big day. I have some doubt that kings, no kings, it's a good slogan for us, because we fight it a lot in order to understand that the problem is not a single person, but it's a political system. And with Meloni, you can see this more than, of course, with the presidential system in the US with Trump. But in my opinion, Trump is not a mad king. Trump is someone that acts a strategy to a counter-offensive of imperialistic system of the US against the rest of the world, facing the emerging of China and other regional forces. So it's a strategy. Maybe it's a poker, you know. Maybe it's a bluff. Maybe he won't succeed in this strategy, but it's not mad. And the problem with this slogan, "No Kings in Italy," is that you cannot adapt everything of the United States in Italy. But it was a very important date, showing that we have a strength. And just to say about the second question, we have a problem, and of course this problem was present in that day of the No Kings. Because if the problem is just the king or the queen in Italy, and we have to get liberated of this queen, of course the simplest, the easiest way is to create this front. But what happened with the liberals, with the center? But what happened? What will happen the day before, the day after you will win election. Because now, in all the inquiries, in all the polls, center-left has as many votes more than Meloni. That's the reason why Meloni is trying to change the electoral system of vote. But what will they do the day after they will win? Because on Palestine, they have no difference, center-left has no difference with Meloni. On war on Ukraine, they are more pro-Ukraine, pro-sending weapons than Meloni's government. On United States, they have same position. So, you know, we have this kind. So what radical left has to ask to reformist left? What is your program? Because it's all about people. It's all about getting rid of Meloni. But tomorrow, and it's all about in center left fighting for who's gonna be the leader of the coalition. But what is the program? And of course, in this moment, I hope to be, I hope that someone prove me wrong, but in this moment they have no program and no different program from that one that they had when they lost election last time. So what a radical left has to do is to create our own program, because in Italy in this moment we have 50% of population that don't vote, and they are all working class and young people. So we have to motivate these people to create a new pole, different from center left and different from right. And since Italian contradiction in Italian capitalism have not ended with Meloni and will not end with another government, we have to work on this. If we started this work 20 years ago, I'm sure now we are more advanced, so we don't have to repeat the same error. In order to go to the immediate, just get rid of Meloni, renounce to our own autonomy. Thank you.
About this announcement of the government, we are gonna make a regularization of 500,000 of people, migrant persons that are in Spain. And this is very important because the last time that we did that was 20 years ago with a government of the left, a left government, but was also more difficult because you had to have a job contract. And now it's not like this. You only have to have been living in Spain for a while. I don't know now how many times, but it's very, very, it's better, this proposal. And yes, that's one of the things that makes you understand that now, after the existence of Podemos, this socialist party has become more in a left way, more, let's say, more exigent. Only because Podemos exists, which is a good thing, but also a difficult thing for the radical left. I mean, is something that wants to do really the radical left, is a thing that has was defending by radical left, and now is being done by this government that wants to seem more like left wing, and it's good, but it's also this problem. No, it's good. I mean, it's very, very good. Also, first of all, because it's fair, and it's fair for the people, for the migrant people, and it's good because the right is in a strange difficulty to confront this. I mean, obviously, far right is very happy with this because they are saying now Spain is gonna change because everyone is coming and all these things. But the other right, let's say the conservative right, it's in a big difficulty to answer, because, for example, the church, the Catholic Church, is defending this, no? So the normal right, the conservative right, like doesn't know how to react. If they say something against this regularization, they seem to develop like the far right, and it's not good for them. But they cannot do anything, no. So I think it's good for all of us. But it's also, yes, this thing that you understand that we have now a neoliberalism left that is making these things, because also is his way of surviving to what happened in the last years. I mean, I was explaining that I think that the existence of the far right of Vox is the way that has found the right to survive, because the right has found a way of found this division, which is better for them. With this division that they have, they can win elections more than if only exists one party. The left, let's say the center left, is also trying to survive, and now has to be more left-wing and do these things. So it's good in one sense, but it's also a problem, because the parties that enter in the government, as Podemos did, are losing their identity, no? And Pedro Sánchez is now like a leader of the left of in all the world, no? And it's not like that. I mean, Socialist Party is a neoliberalist party, and it's only like a tactic that we have to ¿cómo se dice? Aprovechar. To push and take advantage, no? But yes, it's a very good thing now in Spain, this regularization, and it's very important for us. Yes, how can I explain this split? This split, I think that was, if we think what are the causes, I think that we have built a party with this kind of populist way of thinking. We wanted to go very fast to arrive to these national elections, and Podemos was built, like we used to say, that was a war machine, a war electoral machine. It was called like that, no? Like we are constructing a machine to win a very, very important election. This is the moment, this is the time. It will not be tomorrow, now is the time. And I think that that was a mistake. I think that this is one of the things that we have to discuss, to rethink, because we did this populistic thing that take a leader, very charismatic, very strong, but we didn't build an organization. So when we didn't get it, when we didn't win this election, everything was like falling very, very fast. In 2 years, we were in 21%, but in 2 years we were nearly disappearing. And there was not a body, like a material thing, like supporting that difficulty, no? And I think that was very volatile. No, I don't know if this word exists. Volatile. Okay. And I think that there is a lesson here. We must build an organization that can survive to a leader. cannot be only the leader. The organization must be more strong and more capable to survive the leader. And we didn't do that. So I think that explained a little bit this fracture, in the sense that the difference, there were not a space where talk the differences, where analyzes the different way of think. There was a very vertical party, and that is not a strong party, really. So it's split. About yes, about this. Where are you? I don't. Okay, it's a very difficult thing, but I think that, like, there is a feminism that is very, very worried about saying that that men have to lose privileges, which is, I think, is true. I mean, they have to lose some privileges, no? But I think that we cannot say only this thing. We also need to say that men are also like in this system, like the system is not something that a man invents one day because it's powerful. Like the men and the women and the men are inside a system, and there is a system that obligates, that says that how must be a man. So, I mean, you can be very privileged in a sense, but you are not free. It's not the same thing, no? You can be a slave with a privilege, but a slave of the system, no? And men have to do the thing to be a good man, a real man. And I think that we have to say this to the boys, to the young men, like, yes, you maybe cannot do this and be like this, but you also can win, no? Get many other ways of being, many other possibility, and there is a freedom also for you, because being that man that you have to be, like, is not be free. So I think that we have to do also this, because they are thinking that all that the feminist is that all that they can get from feminists is losing thing. Lose this, or not being this. This is the man that you cannot be. And I think that we have also to speak about all those things that they can win, they can be, they can. Because I think it's true. I think it's very, very true, no? For example, talking about the right to care your children, no, is something that you can win against your company, no? Is something good that you win, and we can win it together. And I am very optimistic, and I mean, I think that when you make this discourse, boys want to listen. And for me, the explosion of feminism in Spain in 2018 has to be with this. Was a discourse very open, very, very, like, speaking to everyone. And the boys, the boys and the young boys were in the street with us. And I think it's possible. But we have to do this effort, no? And I think that there is a feminist that, like, wanted to do something like more close, like, no, this is our fight, this is for us. Like, I can understand in a sense, I can understand that when you are, like, fighting with maybe sometimes with partners, with men partners, you can get in this way very protective, like, this is our fight, this is only for us. But I think that is not the way. This fight is a fight for 99% of the people, against 1%. And we have to construct like this. And I think that the feminists, for example, the black feminism, which was always a very working class feminist, has said always this. This must be for women and for men, and we have to fight together. So I think it's...
So that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's the end of our time.